We had a lot of pressure on us at that point, which was good. It was healthy pressure, but we didn't quite have enough to set up a US team or a US office. An office was a over-glamorization of what we had. It was a cupboard, basically, in a Regis office building in North Carolina.
Like, how did you educate yourself on what SaaS is and what good SaaS is?
As you grow, you mature as a person in that business, and you realize that, hey, we've got to grow a SaaS business. And so I think it's just an evolution of time where the external pressures force you to understand what's important. Success really depends on those numbers, that performance, the unit economics of the business. But for me personally, I loved it.
How do you pony up to say, all right, I'm ready to go again?
Having got to know a lot of people, I think.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Troy. That means you're watching the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. I hope you fucking love startups as much as I do, because we have a real joyful episode for you today. And Tim Boyle. Tim is the former co-founder of WhipAround. He's now the CMO at HealthNow. He's a really energetic, lovely, amazing guy who really knows his unit economics about SaaS. He knew a lot about SaaS, and so we get pretty deep into moments. And so if you're new to SaaS, if you want to hear about international expansion, like first customer ever in the US, created a whole business model around moving to the US straight away, you're going to love this episode. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor and Oxygen Advisors. Oxygen, if you don't know them, they are a team of finance and CFO experts helping early stage and high growth companies throughout New Zealand to become the future massive big global SaaS companies of tomorrow. They help us, or they help SaaS companies provide like accurate, reliable monthly reporting. They do metric dashboards. They do strategic support right through to helping to raise capital. The thing I love about them the most is they also fucking love startups. And so they're one of our favorite sponsors, and we hope you really enjoy this episode brought to you by Oxygen Advisors.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning in to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
How did you get into SaaS, mate? What was your story?
I get asked that a lot, actually, and it's not a hugely glamorous one. My co-founder in WhipAround, I mean, I had been involved in a couple of other, call them concepts. They weren't really startups. Yeah. And
were you looking for something, or was it? Yeah.
I mean, not. I always had a drive in me that I've got an entrepreneurial streak. I like business. I wanted to start a business. I wanted to build equity in my life in some respects. And I'd been involved in a few other, what were in hindsight pretty cool concepts, but timing in my own world probably wasn't right, or the commitment wasn't there, the priority wasn't there. And so my co-founder at WhipAround, James, was working, I was flatting with him at the time, and we were throwing all sorts of mud at the walls, subscription undies, every other...
Subscription undies?
Oh, socks,
How much did you put into that?
Thankfully, nothing. Yeah. But, we probably got some designs mocked up or something. But I think the concept of subscription revenue was interesting to us at that point.
Didn't Barnaby end up doing that?
I heard that on his podcast. I didn't know that, but I heard when I was listening to his episode, I thought, holy smokes, we could have been going head to head in the subscriction undie market.
The Xero ecosystem could have been the undie ecosystem in New Zealand.
Could have been, yeah. Watch out, Rod.
Yeah.
So we were flatting together. He worked in the freight industry and not in the operational side. WhipAround being a fleet maintenance software platform, you would think he was sort of fixing trucks or driving trucks or whatnot, but he wasn't. But he'd seen enough of the owner drivers at some of these large companies that he was working for, Toll and DHL and things like that, where the paper-based compliance, the spreadsheets, the inspection forms, with a backdrop of the regulatory environment in New Zealand under the Health and Safety at Work Act, there was sort of this pain that people were having to comply with things, manual processes, and I think over a couple of beers one night, he's like, I think there's a pretty easy problem to solve. It wasn't rocket science, and we weren't rocket scientists. So that kind of ticked a few boxes for us that we could probably have a crack at this. And we already sort of knew who the customer was going to be. It was a pretty simple solution that we thought we could deliver. And that was really the first step into that side of the tech market was, hey, let's give this a crack.
What was the elevator pitch then? Go back to what were you talking about to new customers?
So we thought our initial product really was as simple as a non-customizable predefined based on the NZTA recommended vehicle checklist.
Yeah.
We put that in a mobile app and we said, hey, don't do it on paper, do it on here, and it'll digitally store these records and make them available for you. And we thought we would, I think James would tell you that I said, look, let's build this app, put it in the App Store, and we'll just wake up every day and see how much money we've collected in the bank.
Yeah.
And that was probably my first hard lesson to learn about tech, that in most cases is not the case.
To even getting something into the App Store, right?
Oh, yeah. So a lot of good lessons to learn. But I think the first step for us in that was we'd sort of thought about it. We'd, machined through the concept. We'd been to speak to a bunch of people. And it wasn't really until we went to the bank and borrowed a bunch of money each on a personal loan and gave it to a developer to build our initial concept that we're like, shit, we're actually doing this, we now owe the bank 20 grand each or whatever it was. And I think that was probably the difference between some of the things that I'd personally done in the past to this was, right.
That's fully invested, right?
We're on the hook, it was a lot of money. And so that sort of gave us the impetus to really go and push into what we were doing. And very quickly, we thought that the New Zealand and Australian trucking market, Australia was going to be huge, bright lights, and we were going to go and kick down the doors of the main freights and the tolls and all these companies. But we found that that was easier said than done. The way that industry worked, there were a lot of contractors, so we weren't necessarily dealing with toll at a head office level. They had 1,000 people that owned 2 trucks each, and so there was a whole sort of environment that wasn't necessarily what we thought it was going to be. But what happened fairly quickly in that process was we'd done all the nuts and bolts. We had some basic marketing, we had a website, and we started getting some inquiry out of the US, where some pretty large companies, Anheuser-Busch.
How are you getting inquiries that early from the US?
I guess it was a pretty rudimentary SEO kind of strategy and a massive credit to James, my co-founder. He was pretty ahead of his time and that sort of thing, certainly smarter than I was in some of our initial marketing concepts. He knew SEO was important. He knew our website needed to talk to specific things, but we were really just a vehicle inspection app at that point. But we were getting these inquiries via our website out of the US, and the one that I always remember was Anheuser-Busch, who own Budweiser, huge, big American brewer that owns thousands of trucks, delivery trucks and things. And they sent us a message and said, hey, interesting product. Do you guys comply with DVIR regulations?
Did you know what DVIR regulations were?
No, but we said absolutely we do, and that's our core product. And then 10 seconds later, we Googled what DVIR was. And what we found out, and this was sort of probably our lucky moment, I guess, was that there were federal regulations in the US that required fleet operators, so trucking, but anyone that operated vehicles over a certain weight threshold, 10,000 pounds, which defined it as a commercial motor vehicle, they had to inspect their vehicles every day. And not only inspect them, but they had to keep a record of those inspections for 90 days, and the Department of Transportation would come and audit them. So compared to New Zealand, where it was the whole vitamin kind of solution, where, look, we like what you're doing, and our drivers should be doing that, but, we're a bit busy at the moment, and let's revisit it in a couple of weeks. We're like, come on, mate, we're asking you for $100 a month here. We're not coming out to have another meeting. In the US, we had a real painkiller. People were struggling to meet their compliance requirements. They were struggling to keep the records. And like a demerit system here, when you get enough demerit points, you lose your license. Over there, you get enough basic score points and you'll get the DOT coming to actually sit in your office and audit you and go through all your paperwork. So we're very lucky in that sense that all of a sudden we found this huge echo chamber of regulatory environment that people were conscious of. They were looking for solutions, and the incumbent way of doing it on paper and manual processes was not working. And so we were able to pivot what we were focusing on from New Zealand and Australia to start crafting a product.
So let's unpack that for a little bit for people listening. What was the compliance thing you said?
DVIR, which stands for Driver Vehicle Inspection Reports.
Cool. So how do you go from yes, we are, not knowing it is, to being compliant in that Like, how do you, obviously you pivot, but like talk me through that process. Is that a laborious, long?
Yeah, sure. So the first step that we had to address was that we'd built a non-customizable inspection workflow based on a New Zealand recommendation from the NZTA. We then found what the US-based inspection components needed to be. And there was sort of 12 or 13 core components of a commercial motor vehicle that needed to be inspected. There's a whole lot of periphery, other things that we learned and evolved over time. But the first thing we needed to do was make sure our inspection report covered the key components that were required under US law. And we did that sort of by just merging what we'd done with a few other little bits and pieces. The second part really revolved around workflows and record retention, which was a big part of the law over there. So we had a pretty simple dashboard and platform and storage system with our initial concept. We needed to sort of evolve that to allow for the storage, the timelines, the searching, the pulling of records, reporting, all of those sorts of things, so that the job to be done for a fleet manager, we were actually solving that problem for. We needed to evolve from just being a straight up digital copy of what the paper-based process was to actually being able to deliver them a time saving, a reduction in risk, increased visibility over issues in their fleet. And that happened over a period of time, but the US law really was more than just asking the question. It was very much how you dealt with the issues. So the workflow management of some of those issues that were being found on the vehicles and how that was managed and recorded was really where the value add in our product was in that market.
And how much revenue have you got when you decided to go all in on this? At
this point, we had no revenue. Yeah. Our first ever customer, who to this day is still a whip-around customer, called Walters Services, is I think you'd call them sort of a Portaloo company out of Philadelphia. Yeah. And so that was a moment when, and I guess testament to working in the New Zealand market and the Australian market and the amount of conversations we were having to have and convincing people this was a good way to manage some of their compliance risk in the New Zealand context. We had a guy in America give us his credit card, put his credit card in online and buy our product.
Yeah, it's amazing the difference in America, how quickly you can find customers who are willing to buy your product versus have, like you say before, have 18 meetings here before they'll even think about it, right?
Absolutely. And so that gave us huge confidence. Our first customer was an American customer, and I think that sort of, if we weren't there already, gave us confidence that our product was probably more of a natural fit. Over time, to your point, we learnt that the American market are far more willing to talk business. Yeah. They're willing to buy on the phone. If you've got a solution to their problem, they'll buy it off you. They'll give you the credit card and they're willing to give it a shot. I think they are far more sort of commercial in that sense, in the way they do business. The difference is you have to kind of build a lot more trust there. They're sold to every day, Even the time I've spent up in the US, my US number, the amount of auto dialers calling in and just, those sort of things, they are being sold to everywhere, every day. And so whilst it's easy to do business when you're there and you get the cut through, it's getting that cut through and building that trusted, position to have that conversation that I think is a little bit harder than here.
How do you do that as a Kiwi with a funny accent in the States?
That's a very, very good point. And I look back to some of our early days at Whiparound. We had our first office up on Ponsonby Road and I was the first salesperson, James taking on other roles. And so I said, right, I'll get up at 3 a.m, I'll go to the office and I'll start calling this database we'd acquired of trucking companies. And after about day 3 of people going, I can't understand you, who are you? And getting hung up on, I think it sort of dawned on us that cold calling and cold outreach was not going to be a way to manage that from New Zealand. So we raised a bit more money and we set up an office in the US and we hired our first...
How early was this? How long are you into it now?
So if we say James and I are kind of beating the doors down with our first customer in early 2016. Yeah. Early 2017, we got some seed investment from a couple of guys who are still heavily involved with the business. Yeah. And that's when we sort of left our jobs and said we're going all in. That was sort of mid-2017. Yeah. And, committed to the path forward. The money we raised from Noah and Peter sort of enabled us to do that, but it was that funny amount of money where it was like, okay, this probably buys us 9 months or something of runway, but you're committed at that point. You've left the day job and you're in. So we had a lot of pressure on us at that point, which was good. It was healthy pressure, but we didn't quite have enough to set up a US team or a US office at that point. So we brought in another investor who was sort of within the group of the guys that we'd brought in, and that funded us to set up an office as a over glamorization of what we had. It was a cupboard basically in a Regis office building in North Carolina. But we had our first Americans, and Mike, Pete, A-Dub and Lauren, 3 sales guys, and our first CS rep were on the tools. And they'd come out of the industry. They knew how to talk to fleet managers. They knew exactly what we did.
The tech industry or actually the fleet industry?
The fleet industry. Yep. So that's sort of how we ended up in North Carolina. We were pretty agnostic as to where we ended up. I think we all had, stars in our eyes that would have a nice office in West Hollywood and, we'd be darting up and down to LA.
Yep.
But thankfully, we found a guy called Mike Flournoy who was based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he worked for a large telematics company. So he was running a sales team there that was selling telematics solutions into the exact industry that we wanted to play in.
What's telematics for folks?
So telematics is sort of the evolution of GPS tracking.
Yep.
What GPS tracking turned into was sort of a richer data collection presentation. Requires hardware plugged into the OBD port in a truck. It is tracking where the vehicle is, but it's measuring, engine performance, fuel economy, speed breaches, a whole lot of visibility that fleet managers might want either for economic performance sort of reasons or safety concerns. So it's a different beast than what we were selling as a software subscription only with no hardware, but they knew the customer. They'd been selling into that industry for years, and they were part of a really successfully large organization. So Mike really, ticked all those boxes for us. And so we ended up in North Carolina for that reason, which was a fantastic thing. In hindsight, Charlotte, North Carolina sort of became a second home. It's an amazing part of the States, and it's sort of it's not New York, it's not LA.
It's building. Mr. Beast is definitely making that place grow.
Yeah, it is. It's a hugely high growth place. So we were really lucky that we landed there. We had some great people that came on board to start with, who are still great friends and stay in touch with, and they really carved out our position in the market up there. But to your original point, having, as we said at the time, having Americans in America in the time zone speaking American was a huge difference. And not that New Zealanders were completely sort of sidelined. I think once we had a little bit of a warm intro, we built great relationships with our customers, and it wasn't a huge negative at that point. But I think at the front lines, smiling and dialing, cold calls, that sort of thing. We used to joke that we were from Nigeria. We were sort of the Nigerian scammer version in the US to some people. But that made a huge difference. You really have to build that local presence, I think, because it at least eliminates that initial opportunity for someone on the other end of the phone to go, nah, this doesn't pass the sniff test.
What do you say to people that are listening to this or watching this thinking, it's easier for me to start in New Zealand first. I've got a little startup in Christchurch. I'm going to test it out here and then see how it goes and then validate it and then continue to grow from there.
I think I've got the benefit of hindsight on this one, and we were really lucky that we found this little bit of cut through in the US market, which kind of, gave us the push to focus our time and energy there. We also had investors and people involved in the business at that point that had sort of been into the US market and knew that that's where we needed to end up eventually. So really, I guess, said, why are we wasting our time here? Let's just go there now. But the hindsight on that for me is, and we'll probably talk a little bit about HealthNow going back into an earlier stage startup, and some of the things that I'm learning and reflecting upon is that the hard work is sort of ubiquitous wherever you are. And talking to the person in Christchurch with a startup, it is naturally really comfortable to be able to ring up your old school friends, your neighbours, your parents, mates, or old colleagues, and
Get connected by someone.
and get connected. Yeah, it's easy. Of course it is. You're at home. You speak the language. You know the people.
Yeah.
You can do those things. But if you ever think you're aspiring to be anywhere else, whether it's Australia, whether it's Europe, whether it's the US, I think what I've learned is that it's hard work in New Zealand and it's hard work over there. And when you look at the size of the opportunity, you're probably going to be doing, save for some of the little things we've talked about having to figure out being present in the market and hiring people and figuring out the legality of being over in a different country. I think at the absolute crux of growing a business and finding success and doing all the things you have to do as a tech business, you're going to be doing that wherever you are. It's just that if you're pushing for leads, you're building a network, you're building presence. In the US, you're just doing that at a hugely different scale than you are here. You're still sort of paying similar acquisition costs potentially. You're still having to find networks. You're still having to keep customers happy. You're still trying to get referrals. And so I think in reflection is that if you aspire to be there, then I think you almost in some respects do yourself a disservice building your business here for too long, because you become a New Zealand company. And I never want to say you become a square peg to go into an American round hole or a European round hole, but there is more to change and more to consider and more to reposition when you do make that move.
And you have, like, I think you have that fear of not being nimble enough to be able to jump on and completely change your app to suit the US market because you've said yes, because you've got something there now and you're a little bit scared about losing that something to go after Y instead of X. And so
absolutely. And I think it's hard work. Like I'm saying, it's hard work getting to the place you want. It's hard work finding success. And I think you can scare yourself into that hard work and think, geez, if it's hard work here, imagine how much hard work it's going to be in the US. And you almost over time think that going there, you've got to solve your problems here first, because then it will make moving to the US much easier. But and I can't speak for Europe so much, but I think that the problems that you solve here are different in a way to the ones you solve there, and you'll spend a lot of time solving for how New Zealanders think and how they buy and sales cycles here and how they react to different marketing and how networks operate and industries and things like that you think, wow, we've finally solved that. We're getting great referral leads coming through from our New Zealand Trucking Association and great, we're going to head to the US. And then you just realize it is a different environment. It's a different culture. We often probably, New Zealanders in particular, are so familiar with the US culture that we think, well, we're like them, we look alike, we're a Western country, we speak English, we're very similar, and we should be able to go and assimilate into that culture and take our learnings here in New Zealand and just dot down and wherever we want to land and go for it. But huge learnings for us over the years in the US is that even the US will tell you there's kind of 6 different mini countries or mini cultures within the US. You've got the East Coast, you've got the South, you've got California, you've got the Midwest, and so even within the US, you've actually then got to unpack, wow, okay, we've got success on the East Coast and we've got businesses up in New England and New York who are talking and thinking a certain way, and we're in the livery association up there and the trucking association. You go and chat to the same people in California and they've got a whole different way of buying and selling and dealing with each other. And so I think to drag that back to New Zealand is you're sort of figuring out your geography and your demographic wherever you are. And so there's product evolution and things that will happen that will give you probably an advantage when you move into a new country. But a lot of that understanding you can only do when you're there. And so the quicker you want to get into a market, I think you just got to be there. You got to be living it and breathing it, learning it and evolving and growing in it, because in a lot of ways it doesn't get that. It may even get harder because you become more of a New Zealand company over time, that you've got to change a hell of a lot more when you want to go and become an American company. The only thing I'd say to that, probably that counters that, is that we fucking love startups. I fucking love startups, and particularly I love SaaS startups. And the reason I love that is because I'm not going to say it's a dark art because it's, you Google it and there's 9,000 different reports on what SaaS benchmarks are, but it is a bit of a dark art being able to build a business within the framework that defines what a successful SaaS business is. And that's the challenge that I love about them. And whether you're building that in New Zealand or the US or Europe, that is the uniformity of what sort of defines a really good business. And so I think as you grow wherever you are, provided you're conscious of that and you're building a good SaaS business, then you at least have the foundations to understand how to jump into another market.
Yeah.
It's okay. We need to grow really fast, but we can't grow too fast. We can't grow too fast if it's too expensive.
Yeah.
Or, we need to acquire customers, but we need to acquire the right size customers comparative to the cost of acquiring those. Or we need to burn a certain amount of money, but it needs to only reflect our growth rate. And so there's a whole lot of these unit economics and SaaS businesses that I think are really interesting, and they sort of, I've got this analogy where it's almost like sailing. Not that I'm a sailor, so it could be a completely terrible analogy, but you've sort of got to balance the sail. You've got to pull one rope, and when you pull one rope, it affects another part of the boat. And so steering a boat in the direction you want, and you've got to tack against different headwinds and tailwinds, and I draw a real conclusion with I guess business in general, but I've always likened it with SaaS. You can always put your foot down. You can always go and acquire more leads and spend a shit ton of money on marketing, but is that an efficient way? Are you becoming a better business by spending a lot more money? Are you burning too much money with regard to your growth rate? Are you acquiring the right size customers? Is CAC recovery going to be in line? So it's always sort of having a terminal point where you're thinking, right, we're investing this money, and you might have shareholders and investors, or you might be, bootstrapping, which I think is an amazing place to be at this point in the world.
A lot of people are bootstrapping at the moment, right? It's a different world that we're in this year than what it's been for the last 5 years, and so
absolutely. And I think hats off to people that are able to do that and grow. I think that takes really, really smart people, and take nothing away from the people that have been part of this culture over the last decade or two, call it the growth at all costs, and have raised money and grown really well. But, that comes with its own challenges and its own pressures and its own agendas, that being able to bootstrap something and be the master of your own destiny in this whole new environment we're in, where capital is kind of hard to come by, and if you are raising money or you need to raise money, valuations are a little bit brutal.
Yeah.
So that whole control element, I think, for bootstrappers is amazing.
When did you have a moment where you sort of looked up and thought, holy shit, we might make it here, like we might be taking off?
You sort of have that every day. Well, no, actually, you don't have that every day, in the sense that I've got massive imposter syndrome. I think, like a lot of founders, that you just wait for it to completely blow up and dissolve in front of you for the first years of existence, and you think, surely something's just gonna, we're gonna get sued out of existence, or we're gonna lose all of our customers tomorrow because there's going to be a competitor taking us over. So you never let yourself believe for a long time. And I think there's certain revenue thresholds that you get to where you start to believe that, depending on the unit economics of the business. So if you've got a lot of customers paying you a smallish amount of money, you kind of have a defensibility. You have a bit of a moat there where, okay, sensibility would tell me we're not going to lose several thousand customers tomorrow.
Yeah.
We might lose 10.
Yeah.
And that sort of, without having a huge weighting of risk in one large enterprise customer, all of that. And WhipAround never really had that. We had a really good mix, really good customer profile. And so I think when I started to understand the importance of that, where we played in the market, the amount of logos we had on board, and I guess when you start looking at a business to say, right, we've got X amount of revenue, if we didn't raise any more money, if the world completely tanked from a capital markets perspective, do we have kind of a pro forma break-even position that the lights can stay on, and we're down to a skeleton team, but we can keep this business moving? Once you sort of start getting to that point, you think, okay, it's a scenario Z kind of situation, but you start building confidence that, hey, we're actually a little bit more the master of our own destiny now if we need to be. And that's probably the moment where I started thinking, wow, we actually have a sustainable business here in a lot of respects. Certainly just from a core cash flow, churn moat perspective, there was something there that would take one hell of a black swan event to wipe off the map. And that was quite an exciting time to think, hey, at least we might not, be out of a job in 6 months. I think we're really in something that's got a long-term future. And that's a pretty cool place to be.
Indeed. There's a lot of people trying to get there at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard work. And, I think even, moving out of Whip Around last year from a day-to-day sense, still obviously really involved in the board and as a shareholder and huge advocate for what that business is now, primarily in the US. Seeing it again in another startup, joining HealthNow. And
what made you go back into a small startup? What was it you were looking for at HealthNow?
I wasn't really looking for HealthNow. I think it's the moral of the story. I left Whip Around and, on great terms, and we've got a great team there that, is really kind of centered on our growth in the US market. And, look, I think looking back, if it wasn't for COVID, I probably would have ended up living up there. We've got Noah Hickey living up there. And a bunch of, our main executive team is up there, bar a couple of people down here from a product and engineering sense. And I probably would have followed suit and ended up there. I think that's the key piece of advice I'd give everyone that wants to be in a market is get up there and live and breathe it. But I left mid last year and was sort of thinking about what I was going to do next. Really enjoy working with other businesses, and I sort of had been dealing with a couple of other startups just informally, helping them with some advice and getting a couple of sort of foundational things in place around sort of saying, hey, you're actually a SaaS business.
How did you let's just stop there for a second. You like unit economics and SaaS and it's like its own vernacular almost, right? And a lot of founders come in and it's like information overload. They read every book, every blog, every TED talk, everything. How did you educate yourself on what SaaS is and what good SaaS is?
I mean, you do a lot of reading. More over time, I think you evolve from just doing the doing, and you're like, I don't care. We're going to get a customer. We need the revenue. We need to hit target this month because we're going to have to raise some money or do what have you. And you've got your blinkers on a little bit to doing that in an efficient, scalable way. But as you grow, you mature as a person in that business, and you realize that, hey, we've got to grow a SaaS business. You bring on more money, you bring on more smart investors who are asking questions, and they are expecting the business to appreciate and value. For that to happen, you need to start meeting certain expectations and benchmarks across some of those economics, and so they become more important in your life from the scrappy early days of just knocking on doors. Absolutely faking it till you make it. And so I think it's just an evolution of time where the external pressures kind of force you to understand what's important, because success really depends on those numbers, that performance, the unit economics of the business. So I think it's a time span. But for me personally, I loved it. I really loved the challenge of trying to build something within the prescribed kind of best-in-class model that the tech industry and the SaaS industry kind of demanded. Because ultimately, I know there's people out there that want to build businesses they own forever and what have you. I think whilst we're hugely passionate at Whip Around about what we do, we've got a lot of investors who are commercial.
Everyone's always looking for an exit.
Exactly.
Right?
And, you have to build a business that is going to stand up for an exit at some point in the future. And so you're forced into, learning, understanding and performing against those things.
Do you think, I often talk on this subject with founders and people and on the podcast and everyone's like, oh, it's my dream business and no, I would never sell it one day. And I'm like, I'll call bullshit on most of it, right? You kind of don't go into SaaS to build your legacy dream business. Everyone's kind of thinking back of their mind, there's an exit there. And I think what my problem, the reason why I talk about this openly is I think we can get deal fever a little bit. There comes time when you get approached for an acquisition, and if you haven't already thought about this, and you haven't had a serious conversation with your partner or your co-founders or whatever it maybe is, then it kind of can take you off the wrong track. because if someone approaches you about an acquisition, you start spending the money in your head about what it could be, and then it literally shifts you that you lose that innate hunger to keep driving forward. And so I think a lot of founders in New Zealand, or a lot of people, need to be realistic about that. Like, fuck yeah, go for an exit. Don't be scared to tell people that you're comfortable and happy with an exit one day, because when time comes, it won't push you off the right track if the deal doesn't land, right?
Yeah.
And so,
and I think that's right. One of our investors, he became a director, a really great guy, Frank Jasper, who's pretty well regarded in his industry, but he came into our business and really entrenched a great motto, which is don't start figuring out what the exit looks like. Let's just focus on today, building a really good business. And if we build a really good business, at some point in the future, the options for that, if and when they're the right time, will be many.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a really good lesson for me to learn is don't try and get too smart and think, okay, right, we're going to get acquired by a telematics company in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
And we've got to really focus on building for that now and do all these things, where ultimately you just build a good business that fits into all those things that we've talked about. And the options for people potentially wanting to acquire you in the future are probably going to be there.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree. I think it's just the whole, don't be scared by being vocal about that, right? Like everyone wants to live comfortably or have the money to be able to go again and do something else. And so on that point, right, like what are you now at HealthNow? So like, A, what's HealthNow? Yeah. And B, talk me through your thinking now coming in and doing it again with the knowledge that you have from Whip Around.
Yeah, sure. So HealthNow is a platform for organisations to give their employees health and wellness benefits. Yep. Doing it in a pretty innovative way. Steve Zinsley, the founder, is a pretty awesome guy, highly motivated, probably a good guest on this podcast in time, actually, I'd say. But essentially the point of difference in this crowded market of HR tech and particularly benefits is that the companies we're talking to are sort of looking for a way to offer a benefit to their employees. There's a sort of tidal wave of wellness and how organizations can help their employees. We believe wellness is a spectrum, and all the current offerings are kind of like, one size fits all. It's everything from just a fruit bowl in the lunchroom to, health insurance contributions or something, but that doesn't really cater to everybody in a workforce. And so HealthNow got essentially a fintech platform. It's got a software component, and it's got a HealthNow MasterCard. So our customers load up that MasterCard with a certain contribution every year, $500, and they get to put the guardrails in the HealthNow platform to say, well, you can spend your $100 or $500 or $1,000. We might decide as an organisation that it's just for primary care. So they just want their people to be able to go to the doctor, or take their family to the doctor, or go to the dentist. And it's just to support them in that very basic healthcare, cost of living crisis and all those sorts of things. Other customers of HealthNow are far more open in their, offering and say, look, spend it on whatever you want. Nike running shoes, gym memberships, yoga classes, but we're going to put the guardrails on. So that card's not going to work at the pub, at a restaurant. You can't buy tobacco, gambling, things like that. So the secret sauce in HealthNow is by locking down where that money can be spent on the MasterCard network via merchant category codes. So we can craft plans within that so that every employee gets access to their money to spend when, why, how, where they want it. But they can't spend it on things that sort of are blacklisted by the company.
Do they spend it?
Yeah, they do. And that's probably one of the strengths that we're seeing with the customers we're engaging in now, are looking at things like EAP services, which are mental health support, almost a must-have for large organisations these days. Top tier utility of EAP services in an organisation is about 6%.
Yeah.
Whereas other studies will say at any given time there's 25 to 30% of your workforce that is having a mental health challenge. And so they're seeking mental health support outside of that. So utility in some of these big, clunky kind of incumbent solutions, benefit solutions, is pretty low because it doesn't necessarily fit the accessibility or the flexibility or the cultural diversity of the people.
Or people just feeling psychologically safe to be able to say, hey, I need some money for X, right? Where if you've got a card in your pocket, you can do it yourself.
Totally. You can go to your counsellor, your GP down the road. And I think we're moving away from this whole sort of one-to-one vendor relationship where organisations are saying, hey, we've got a relationship with one particular vendor in Auckland. If you guys need to go and see a doctor, go there. Hang on, I've got a GP that I've been going to for 30 years. He's got all my records, who knows me. I want to go there. well, unless you've got a platform like HealthNow that kind of puts that money, that contribution in their pocket to make that choice, that's why we're seeing the utility. People are really saying, hey, this is my decision about where, A, what wellbeing means to me on that spectrum, but B, how do I utilize it? Where do I utilize it? You know? So it's a really cool company. And back to your original question, I wasn't looking to get involved in, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was taking a little bit of time off after, a pretty hard slog at Whip Around, and I actually was connected via Kiwi entrepreneurs abroad, Kia, who I've been really well aware of, but I'd never really had much to do with. And they reached out to me and said, hey, we've got this founder. He's in New York. He's looking to raise some money. He's kind of kicking doors down up there. And he's keen to chat. Do you want to connect with him? I said, absolutely. Just plug him in. And this was actually before I'd left Whip Around. But so we got on a couple of Zoom calls, and this highly motivated young guy, in New York trying to, meet VCs and do the thing. And so we just started chatting and bouncing ideas off each other, and I sort of introduced him to a couple of people I knew, and over that time sort of started understanding what the product was that he was building, and got kind of excited about, well, it's a cool opportunity. So late last year said, look, I'll give you some time and come in, do some consulting, and thought I'd sort of, swan in, do
a day a week.
Yeah, don't worry, I'm a founder. I've been doing this for years, and I'll write you some documents. Well, I think day 3, he's like, right, you're our marketing guy. I'm like, I've actually never really been, solely in charge of marketing.
Yeah, I was going to say, because when I saw your current title, I was like, I didn't peg that was your background, right?
Yeah, well, it's not technically. I mean, I think as a founder, you're always invested in marketing, right? It's the lifeblood of your business in some respects. But he sort of gave me this challenge. He said, why don't you come in and I think, you'd add some value. And so we started working together on a sort of lighter touch basis for a couple of weeks, until I realised I should have known better that early stage startups are not part-time gigs.
Yeah.
And that was a good thing, good lesson to learn. Great team, great product, and I sort of just fell back in love with solving the problems that I hadn't dealt with at that level for a number of years.
It's a good way to get in, though, because you're not chasing the dragon, right? Like you organically find your way into an opportunity. A lot of people, especially founders that I speak to, that looking for their next journey, their next chapter, they're chasing that, and so they go into it with the wrong connotations or the wrong mindset of what they're looking for.
Exactly, and I certainly came into this with a pretty open mind, and it's landed well. Like this year, I've come back full time, really vested in the mission that they're on, and it ticks a lot of boxes for me, in that you got a founder who's crazy enough to be, a founder, but really on point, highly energized, just laser focused on the mission, but genuinely passionate about the outcome. He's a clinician by trade, podiatrist. He sort of had his own business in that space, and it was with that hands-on involvement in healthcare, seeing people not be able to afford basic healthcare in his world, or not accessing it quick enough, or putting it off and resulting in lesser outcomes, that led him to this solution to enable people to have better access to healthcare. And not just that, but really land on the fact that, hey, companies and organizations should be investing in this for their people. Their people are their best asset, and to have happy, healthy, engaged people, they need to contribute. It shouldn't just be up to the government or ACC at the bottom of the cliff when you've had an injury. There's a real proactive element to this. And, there's a conclusion to draw at Whip Around about preventive maintenance, where, our platform ended up being far more about preventive maintenance than it did about inspections. And so I really bought into that, and I'm sort of inspired by his mission that he's on, that it's not just about, the dollars and the exit and all of that. Like, he genuinely wakes up in the morning, he's like, I want to do this as much to build a great business, but because I want to actually impact the community. And so, we really track metrics that are based on people on the platform, lives, money spent, utility. How many tens of thousands of dollars got put out into people's wellness spend today that wasn't there before HealthNow existed. And it's a huge market. So for me, sort of, convincing myself I should get into something early stage again, roll the sleeves up, and do all that hard work that you've got to do.
Is it different as an employee?
It is a little bit, not as much as I thought. I was sort of like all care, no responsibility, which is probably the wrong thing, Steve. Sorry if you're listening. But, that's sort of where you start.
Yeah.
Go
you're not a founder, right? You can almost relax for a little bit.
You're not in that sense. And so I guess there's a layer that you're not responsible for, which is a thing that keeps you up at night. When it is your business, it's, do we have enough money in the bank? Are we going to keep going? What are these existential threats that are coming at us from everywhere that your average employee isn't privy to? And you wear that when it's your business. And, you're on the board and you're sort of having to think that through. You don't have to do that at the same extent. But you are kind of collectively responsible for the success of the business, and particularly at this early
I think you choose to be, right? Like you choose to take on the responsibilities or not. And so,
and I'm that person, right? I don't want to front up to work in the morning and be like, look, I'm just not in it today. I'm not going to go the extra mile, or
5 o'clock, see you later.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, for good and bad, that's kind of the way you have to operate in these things. Things happen at various times. There's, pressure at certain moments that you got to do things. But I think I've learned about myself. I like that. I like the challenge. I like figuring out new ways of kind of breaking the mold, because I guess I'm also noticing, and whilst I'm not a career marketer in that sense, I think that's the traditional digital marketing landscape's getting harder and harder. Where we were 10 years ago paying for Google ads and keywords and retargeting banners and things, I just don't see that working in the way that it did now. It's hugely ineffective. People are just desensitized to, in some respects, to traditional kind of SEO might be a little bit different.
There's a few Kiwi companies making a big bank off that at the moment, right? And so,
yeah. But I think you've got to get really innovative now, and that's what I find passion doing is not just sitting back, spreadsheet marketing. It's really going, right, how do we cut through? How do we get influence? How do we build a network effect? And Steve's great at this, and so him and I work really well together, but genuinely finding a passion for solving those problems, getting to events, activating them, hacking the system, all those sorts of things, which take a lot of effort and time and
where's your customer base?
Here in Australia. So we're just pushing into Australia, which again is landing back in that whole conversation we started with, is Steve's pretty on board with it, which is a good thing, but saying, hey, it's comfortable here. Yep, we can pick up the phone to anyone we want and say, you've got a business, you should buy us, but are we going to become the organisation we want by being focused in New Zealand? No. So we just launched in Australia, and we're making some really good traction over there with, to prove the point, we sit here in New Zealand and think, wow, we just got a meeting with this company. They've got 3,000 employees. That's huge. I've actually got my brother working for us over in Australia, and he's constantly berating me, going, why do you get so excited about ABC company? He goes, I met with 3 of them this morning.
Yeah.
And, you've never heard of them. So we've got these big logos here.
They've got 3,000 in their HR team.
Exactly. And so this is just Australia. This isn't even America. And so,
Had your brother worked in SaaS before?
No, not technically. He's come out of the health industry, the medical industry over there, and is really well connected with a lot of the large employers over there. They, tendered for a lot of work and worked with a lot of the top tier organisations over there to run sort of their pre-employment medical processes, on-site medicals, injury management processes. So he knows the industry really well. Run teams over there and got a great network. So it was just a really natural fit. When he left his last role, I said, well, geez, why don't you come and have a little play here? So it's just, that whole conversation we've had about, okay, we're going to, even Australia is a different market to here.
You can achieve the results that you really want to do for your customers in New Zealand if you're able to get the revenue numbers from other regions, right? Like you can actually do good with that money here in the country. Absolutely.
And look, New Zealand's going to be a key market for us. There is a wave of rethinking how health and wellness is delivered within organisations. I think that's happening in New Zealand as much as it's happening everywhere else. In a similar sort of fashion to Whip Around, there isn't the regulatory backdrop here that we play against. It's, hey, we want to do the right thing. We're seeing it's going to be easier to recruit, retain and engage people by offering a better benefit solution to them. And that's where we are sort of having those conversations. wellness is becoming part of a health and safety remit here more than it has. So we're seeing health, safety and wellness officers.
We were talking about this last night at dinner with Jono, and I was talking about my physical and mental health spiraling up and spiraling down, right? And I was saying, look, I'm feeling like I've been in a good place the last couple of months, but it was before that, it was like, fuck, I had to put myself in check because I knew that I was spiraling down and I knew the right thing to do, but I didn't act on it. So the difference between knowing and doing, all right? And so is that something that you're able to like think about in terms of a product or see a benefit of, like giving people the opportunity to do something about it faster? Or
Absolutely. What I've seen being in HealthNow and the HealthNow, I'm going to pull it out, just a shameless plug here, but it'll give you the sort of endorsement of what I'm saying. You know, that's the HealthNow card.
Yeah.
But to your point, a lot of organisations might have a budget there. They might say, hey, you've got $250 a year.
I've worked in HR and I can tell you that we largely bank on a lot of people in HR not spending their budget because we need the money.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's probably the reality in some respects. But these things fall behind the scenes, either intentionally or not. And people...
Well, you want them to use them. You just hope that they don't because you could use that money in other places, right?
Yeah.
And so you want them to. It's not like you're stopping them, but...
Yeah, exactly.
You're not making it as easy as possible.
Some companies really do genuinely push for their budget to be utilised, but having a card in your pocket and being able to have access to a dashboard of how much spend is in there, what categories are available, it puts that availability front and centre.
Yeah.
So when you have people, like you mentioned, spiralling, up or down mentally and potentially considering, oh, do I need to do something about this? Having that physical, tactile opportunity to go and spend that money on something that might support that moment in your life is something that is really valuable to organisations that are genuine about wanting to invest in the well-being of their people.
Yeah.
So it's exciting on that respect, but we have to rethink Australia now. There is a different regulatory landscape. They do things differently. They don't have ACC.
Yeah.
And so going back to that initial conversation, it's like, great, New Zealand's going great for us. We're really, we're firing. We're now going to start doing that in Australia, but we have to remessage. We have to figure out that landscape.
Because is your target, are you taking away from the private health insurers in Australia? Is that...
No, so Australia is a little bit different with like Medicare and things like that have some different elements that we have to cater to, but essentially HealthNow is just a delivery mechanism for benefits. And so we sort of... People say, oh, you're an alternative to Southern Cross in New Zealand or what have you. We're not really. What we're just saying is, why don't you use HealthNow to give people the choice?
Yeah.
Some people may not want Southern Cross. They may have another insurer. 20-year-old Jack in the warehouse may think, actually, health insurance isn't that important to me now. I'd rather go and do, surfing lessons or whatever the company sort of enables. And so we're saying we're not stopping anyone from spending that contribution wherever they want. And it could be insurance. It could be the things that are kind of hard-coded into the organisation. But if it's not that, so we were laughing yesterday about there's a bit of an undercurrent in the HR space that we feel is wellness is the fruit bowl in the lunchroom.
Yeah.
And we're sort of like, what if you don't like fruit? What if I want lollies? What if lollies make me happy at work every day? And that's my wellness.
Yeah.
We can't. The company has told you must eat fruit, and that's what's going to make you well. Well, we don't think that way.
I remember working in a company, I won't mention which, but we had a small Wellington office, which is part of a bigger company, and we were like, there was people feeling a bit burnt out, and we got sent, because we didn't have any individuality on our wellness, right? Like we got sent a whole bunch of mood mugs that would change colour based on your mood. And so they sent that to a bunch of like salesy and technical people, and I was like, oh, this is not going to go down well here. Like, and I was like recruiter person, but also I had to wear the HR hat at times, and I was like, oh, they don't want this. What they want is to be able to like go to the gym at lunchtime, and then, or they want to be able to like literally go for a run or do these things. And so
you're spot on. And in all honesty, that's sort of the conversation that's got me excited about what HealthNow is doing. Is we meet with different organisations, and it's almost like they're sort of reading from our own hymn sheet. They're sort of saying, well, this is our problem and this is what we're trying to achieve. And it's almost like, well, thanks, you've just told yourself exactly what we're trying to deliver you. So it's exciting from that perspective, and I think it's...
How do you pony up again? Like, because you know what you're about to get into now, right? You fucking know well, and you're well aware what this journey is going to be like uphill. How do you pony up to say, all right, I'm ready to go again?
It's a good question. I haven't... I think a lot of the challenge around... I won't say burnout, because I wasn't burnt out. You know, I think people... It would be unfair.
Burnout's a spectrum, right?
Exactly. I think mentally you can kind of peg that to the current journey you're on. And so, for Whip Around, my time to leave was for a range of different factors. But a lot of the burnout, if that's what you want to call it, and the challenge and the mental sort of, stuff going on there was really specific to that. I think I was 26 months in a row flying to the US every month. So all those things become kind of brutal. That was just before COVID. But those things kind of are relevant or unique to Whip Around, and so there's almost a little bit of a break from that, doing something else that's
changes
new and fresh, and exactly, changes as good as a holiday. So I think for me that solved that. I'm energized. I love doing this. I love the challenge. I love trying to build companies, and I've found that the New Zealand tech sector is pretty cool. There's great people in it, and having got to know a lot of people, I think it sort of builds a little bit more confidence that I kind of want to be in this sector. I was a real estate agent for 10 years before Whip Around. I loved it. Yeah. And if any of my old colleagues are listening, I genuinely did love it.
Got as good a testimonials as a real estate agent as a recruiter, mate.
Yeah, exactly. I had lunch with a couple of them last week, so we're still all good friends. And I love the commercial property space, but having been sort of call it 8 to 10 years in tech, I'm pretty confident this is where I want to be. Yeah. And so to do that, you just got to keep going again. Yeah. I don't think I'm wired to be in a cushy job and an executive of a company that's doing all the corporate things that's solved all those problems or think they have. I like the grassroots. I like rolling the sleeves up. And so for me, ponying up again is just kind of the natural thing. Keep doing it. And whilst this isn't necessarily me starting something again, I'm not that fussed about it. Like, I genuinely get enjoyment about being part of something that I think is going to be quite transformational. That's with a really good team.
And I think as a founder, you feel the empathy to founders, right? So you will always go a little bit above and beyond what a regular employee will do.
Totally. And that's probably been the hardest part of HealthNow, is all of a sudden I'm sort of like, shit, I've got a boss.
Yeah.
And not in a bad way, but, I do have to check myself. I'm like, okay, right, captain's call. That's what we're doing. Whereas over the last however many years, you've got a say, and it's a reasonably big slice of the pie, albeit there's a couple of cooks in the kitchen.
I'm quite drop the hammer though.
Yeah, exactly. And you can kind of go, hey, I know where we should be heading, and I've got a fairly qualified opinion on it. Here, I've had to check myself in that quite a bit, and it's not a negative at all, but it's just a different muscle memory to kind of be like, right, what's your vision? What do you want to do? Where do you think we're going to head? And there's an opinion and a sounding board, but I'm kind of bolting into what your vision, and you've got to respect that, because that's probably the biggest lesson is to find success, you need to be aligned. And if I came into HealthNow with an ego that I knew better than anybody else, I thankfully certainly know that I don't know more than Steve and the guys that have been in this business for a little bit longer when it comes to the exact space we're operating in. But that's probably been the biggest mind shift for me is okay, I'm part of a team now. There's a vision that's not mine. It's becoming mine, and I've just got to deliver that with the people around me in a really respectful, way that is giving as much of a contribution as I can, but while still drawing on the experience of, steering a ship yourself. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's fun, but it's challenging.
I as a recruiter, I get a lot of founders reach out to me when they're at that position in their career where they don't know if the path ahead is in their own business, and they feel horrible. Like their mental health is depleted, because how do you tell someone, or how do you tell co-founders, or how do you tell yourself, I'm on a different chapter now, right? Like this, my path going forward isn't this business. And so it probably is, it's like a 6-month process sometimes when I'm working with them, to say, well, do you want to keep pushing? Like, do you have anything left in you? Like, you never want to tell someone to give up on their dream or their baby, right? But then it's a hard conversation.
Yeah.
But there is there's something cathartic about like when you can take all the information that you've got and then move on to something else and go again. There's like, you can do some wonderful, amazing things, right? And it's literally just chapters in life that you look back on and you go, fuck, I learned a lot then.
Yeah. And I think you're spot on by saying chapters in life. That's probably the way I think about it is provided you're committed to the chapter you're in, it'll be a great learning no matter what happens. Someone said a great phrase to me the other day, school fees, expensive, hard, brutal lessons to learn, but if you can take the mentality of like, shit, I just learned that and that's great, I'm going to be better for that in my life, even though it sucked at the time. I've learnt that the hard way. Those are the things that those chapters build up, and every time you start a new one, you become a richer, more experienced, more diverse kind of thinker that at the end of it all, you can probably look back and go, shit, that was fun.
Awesome, man. Hey, so it's been really awesome sharing some time with you, man. It's it's evident for me that you've got that energy to go again, and that you could be like exactly what a founder needs, right? Someone that's walked their path and has diverse thinking and experience that you can add to subject matter experts. And so it's fantastic. I love it when I see this come together. I think HealthNows sounds great. I like the idea of a card in the pocket. That to me feels a lot smarter than having a budget that people don't ever access to, get access to. Or when they do, they release it and pay it out at the last day of the month. They just spend it at the pub.
Unfortunately, these days people don't have spare cash to wait for 2 weeks to expense reimburse or whatever. So
on season 4, I'm wrapping up a little bit differently, and so I'm going to throw something at you that you probably haven't thought about or seen on the previous podcast, so sorry about that. But what I'm asking is, what's a question that you would ask the next guest? And while you're thinking about that, I'll give you the question that was asked to you. How do you calendar your week to drive a successful business or to run a successful team?
The last part's probably the kicker. So I say, how do I run my week? Very poorly at the moment because it's all just spinning plates. But I think depending on, provided whether you're a founder or CEO or you're at least sort of leading a team in some respects, that's a really, really important element of success because you can very easily be sucked into every call, every new opportunity. So I think in a perfect world, and coming out of Whip Around, we got that pretty sharp. HealthNows getting good posture on it. I think you need a key leadership meeting a week. Mm-hmm. Whether that's Monday mornings, debatable. I've got ideas on why that isn't the best idea. And then you just need a team meeting, really. And I think less is more. Things come up during the week.
Team meeting a week?
Team meeting a week.
Yeah.
And that's your internal kind of leadership sync and making sure that everyone's aware of what's going on, what the priorities for the week are. You got a team sync. When you just got so much doing going on, you just kind of need to free up as much time for everybody to do it, but you need to ensure those two meetings kind of talk to each other. So the marketing team needs to be focused on the priorities that have been discussed at the leadership meeting.
Yeah.
And that's quite things are moving pretty quick, so weekly cadence is important there.
Yeah.
And then I think when you've got a monthly roll up for a leadership team, depending on how active your board is, what's being reported up to the board, how you're tracking on a quarterly kind of sense, how does that attach to the macro plan, and objectives that you've got, because you do need to kind of have that even above a weekly weekly management sync. You need to be able to look, okay, where are we in the quarter? What do we need to be doing this quarter? Where do we need to put the gas down a bit more? Are we short anywhere? Where in the funnel are we not performing? So those are the three key ones that I think from an organisation and management perspective, you can run a pretty effective business just on those three.
Yeah, awesome.
And then you'll get slammed by 900 other meetings during the week anyway.
Yeah.
And my question for the next guest, it sort of depends on what she or he, what role they play. But I guess it's, where do you want to be in 5 years' time from an organisation? So I'm assuming that this person's kind of leading an organisation's their business. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time, and what are you doing about it today? and I mean, where do you want to be size-wise or geographically? So linking back to my, if you want to be an American business growing in America, if that's where you want to be, what are you doing about it today to make that a reality?
Yeah, answer that question yourself.
So we want to be in America. I think that's our plan. We're unashamed of that. What are we doing today? Well, I'm telling Steve that we've got a big plan in Australia. We've got to build scale there, and that my lesson learnt from Whip Around absolutely is that you have to be in market. You cannot be successful in another geography from New Zealand at an early stage. And so and he is very receptive to this, but I'm encouraging him, get on a plane, move to Australia, and then move to America is probably the way that you give yourself the best chance of success. So mine is all about physical presence and building the team.
Yeah, I don't think you can beat it.
Yeah.
Personally. Hey mate, it's been great to have you in physical light today. As I said, I love to sit across the table and chat with people. It's a much better conversation for me when I can actually, stare into someone's eyeballs and follow the conversation versus staring at a screen. And so I'm a big advocate of that. And so
a lot of long gazes into our eyes during this, but I loved it and love the podcast, mate, and I appreciate being on.
Okay, well, I think we're all sitting around now thinking about what we would do with the money on the credit card. Jono and I are going to go off and probably get a massage after this podcast today. Go and get our MasterCard to massage my old body. It's been sitting in this chair all day podcasting, and I can't wait to go and do that. I'm not going to get a massage. I'm probably just going to jump on a plane and go home from Auckland. It's been a joy to bring this to you. It's been an honour and a privilege to host this series, to get people like Tim on to share this information and knowledge so that he can help the next co-founder that he's currently working with now, the next founder that he's working with now in HealthNow, and every other person that's listening to this podcast. So thank you to everyone that's watching. If you're still here now, you know that this is where I reel you in to join us and say, jump into the community by subscribing. If you're on YouTube right now, that subscribe button is where I want you to go. If you're on Spotify or another podcast platform, jump on and hit follow, because you really help us to continue to make this podcast better and better and better. We're only able to attract sponsors and only able to get on the platforms and the marketing and everything with your support. And so if you've been on this journey with us, now's your time to jump on and can keep going with us. If you're new, jump on right now and subscribe or follow and share it around with anyone that you think might enjoy this episode. Thanks for watching. I'm Troy, and you've been watching the We Fucking Love Startups podcast.
This podcast is produced by Jono Tucker from Empire Films.